KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan Gunny Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today. How are you? How you doing?
I am the Gunny to your LT. I was hoping you were going to call me either Hitman or Iceman, but I'll take Gunny.
Hitman or Iceman? Chaos?
It's better than Whiskey Tango.
Whiskey Tango, yes. That's true. Yeah, Chaos was my favorite.
Chaos was good. Yeah, that's a great one.
So
was Chaos the call sign for
General
air
Mattis
support, like the Cobras? I don't know.
No, I think it was General Mattis was Chaos.
Oh, okay. I think you're right. Yeah. That was the top of the food chain.
Yeah. So how's life? What's going on in your world? Talk to me.
Everything. I had random thoughts today. Yeah. I don't even know how this popped in my head because I haven't thought about this kid from my past in decades, right? So I was just thinking, oh, you know what it was? I called Kiki something and I was like, oh, I knew a kid named that. So I grew up with a kid named Mush, right? He was about a year or two older than me in school. He lived down the block and he was just like an acquaintance. I wasn't really close with him or anything, but everybody called him Mush. And then I called Kiki that this morning. I was like, get over here, Mush. I had to wipe her face after she ate. And then I was just thinking about this kid, Mush. He was an Italian kid, a little bit older, but he looked like a mush. Like it just worked. And then I thought of like every neighborhood or every school has either a mush and or a Smitty, right? And Smitty, you know where that derives from. That's just Smith.
Right.
And then I knew some Smiths that weren't Smitty. So there's a little mystery in that too. But the mush thing is a little more mean-spirited because it's not based on a surname or your actual last name. It's something that has all to do with your appearance.
Yes.
And then it occurred to me too, like, I never knew this guy's real name. I was like, what was his real name? And then it occurred to me, like, I don't think I ever knew his real name because he was just one of those guys, a little older than me. I didn't really hang out. Maybe I saw him on the bus. Never got to know him or his family or anything, but he was just mush. And he just had that mush face. So I just want to give a shout out to Mush.
Yeah, give a shout out to Mush if you would.
Did you ever know a Mush?
I never knew a Mush. I never knew a Smitty either. Although I feel like in Boston there were a bunch of Smitties. Everywhere.
That's such a Boston thing. Southie, maybe even.
Southie. Oh yeah,
right.
Definitely. Which was around, which was kind of around where we were. I lived in Back Bay.
Yeah.
And over towards Roxbury for 5 years, but yeah, it's funny because nicknames are endearing, and it's funny how they just generate. Usually, just to truncate a name, people have long called me Carl. People that have been close to me, I feel like I notice when someone tries to throw that word around and they're not close enough to me to throw it around, because no one calls me Colin in my close world. No one calls me that.
Okay.
I mean, you would know. I think you would know that, right? I mean,
I would. But I was wondering, what about like newer members of the family? Like, what does Micah call you?
She doesn't really call me anything. Actually, come to think of it, I guess I actually did notice she called me Colin the other day.
Oh,
but
she was mad. At you.
Yeah. No,
she get the full name.
She doesn't really get mad at me. I don't think. Maybe she does, but yeah, I just feel like that's always been my nickname. And the thing that makes me laugh too is being a hockey fan for so long is, and you wouldn't notice this, but everyone in hockey, like, they just add E to the end of their name when they talk about themselves, so it's so annoying. You can't do it with either of my first names, but you can do it with like lots of different names and just take the first syllable and add E to the end of it.
Yes,
so,
absolutely. I know exactly what you mean.
Or Yammer or something like that, like Rammer.
I love the That's such a preppy, like, prep school Ivy League thing. Collie you can't really do. Colony is just too many syllables, so you're safe from that.
Yeah, I just I'm just Col or whatever, but it is funny to think about how I think I've told this story, but a person that comes up on the show often, my friend Eric, my good buddy from childhood, who's the guy that got me into D&D and all those things that we talk about a lot, like a lot of fantasy stuff, and his real name is Reinhardt. And
oh my goodness,
his dad's name is Reinhardt. So he's the only child, and his parents, really nice people. His dad's name is Reinhardt. He used to go by Reiny. And
that's cool. I like that.
And so I remember being in school with him in a class, and during like the beginning, the first day of class. So it's actually funny. We were just doing the first, opening of school and all of that. And
sure.
I don't know where it was or when it was, but at some point we were in this class together where they were reading the roll, and it was like, Reinhard Schumann. And I was like, what? Like, I'm like, that's your dad. And he's like, no, I'm also Reinhard
Jr.
Schumann, but my middle name's Eric, and everyone just calls me Eric. So his name was Reinhard Eric Schumann. And as he became an adult, I don't want to say just 4 or 5 years ago, I had dinner with him in San Francisco, and I saw him for the first time in a long time. It was great to see him. And he goes by Reinhardt in his adult
I
life.
would. Oh, absolutely. I was hoping that was going to be the outcome. Yeah.
But my whole thing, I remember asking him, like, can I just call you Eric? Like, I don't know you as.
What did he say?
Yeah, he was like, yeah, that's fine.
It's fine.
But he was like, no one. But I think his thing was like, you have to understand, if you were around people in from my adult world, no one knows that would even be what I was called.
Absolutely.
And I'm like,
that creates a conundrum for the childhood friends, though, because then you got to switch it up, and that's a pretty drastic change from Eric to Reinhardt.
Right? Because it was that thing where the teacher says it, and then you're like, no, I want to be called Eric or whatever. And it's like, okay.
Right.
And you write it in your little ledger, and that's the end of that. But for
Not
some reason,
like my daughter, who was called Lily for an entire school year. I was like, why didn't you correct the teacher in the first week? She was like, I felt bad, blah, blah. The guy was calling her Lily all year. I was like, that's not your name.
Yeah.
You're too polite.
I was going to say, if it's not his, I mean, it is his fault, but if you just let it go, then it becomes not his fault.
Sure. Right. Yeah, absolutely. A lot of times with her, she'll have it where they do Lily and then A is the middle initial. Like they just think the A is like, stands for the middle thing.
Mm-hmm.
But she has a middle name. So that doesn't begin with A. So I don't know who the hell.
It's interesting you chose that vowel and not Lily. Oh,
Lily. Oh, only when we're mad at her.
Yeah.
Always.
Are you mad at her a lot?
No, she's a good kid. She's at school, actually, ironically, following last week's conversation that you and I had. She's
so everyone's back?
They had a little window to come in, socialize, get their lockers, decorate their lockers if they wanted to.
Oh, that's cool. I don't remember doing that.
So it was fun. And I was going there, driving her and her friend this morning, and I was like, you're just thinking, like, a lot of people going to go in for this. Are they still down the shore, on vacations or whatever? It was packed with cars dropping off and picking up and everything. They could go in. I think they had like a 6-hour window. They could come and go as they wanted.
I wanted
she
I
was
feel
just
like
meeting some friends,
I was going to say like that. I don't remember doing that, but
I don't either.
But maybe I did do that.
I don't recall that.
I don't remember doing that though. That's a nice idea. It takes because then you could also walk the halls and figure out stalk how you get from one class to the next and all of that, which is
you plan out your trajectories. They got their schedules this morning, so they know their teachers and who's in class.
What grade is she in?
She's going into 9th now. She's in 9th,
right? Oh man,
which is still junior high school where we are.
Mm.
High school is only 10, 11, 12.
That's crazy.
Did you see that they have lockers?
Yeah, I mean, that was a huge
because that's going the way of the dodo pretty quickly.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. But they still have them. So that's good.
Well, where are they supposed to put their things?
That's the thing. I think as the push to tablet and laptop becomes more prominent, I think as textbooks become less and less of a thing. Yeah, but on her list, she had to get trapper keepers and folders and stuff. It felt very like a really proper follow-up to what we talked about last week. It was actually really funny. I went to Target. There's a big back to school section. I mean, huge back to school section with all the stuff you need, pencils and notebooks and, erasers and pens and everything. That was pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know. It's interesting with her and her friends in school because, well, the locker thing is one thing that I was hoping would kind of stay around, but also our area just had last night, they passed a mandate for mandatory masks for K through 6 in school because the hospitals in the area kind of put the pressure on the school district to say look, we're our pediatric units are almost full right now. It doesn't really have to do with COVID. It's just a matter of being understaffed and being over full in the local hospitals. So I think the school district felt like, all right, we have to, enforce masks for the little ones at least. And then hopefully, and they're pushing for everybody to be not mandatory, but they're pushing for the older kids 12 and up to be vaccinated. So we'll see. I don't know, man. It's how long is this going to last?
I don't know. It's annoying.
It's a protracted situation, you know?
Well, it's good to see you.
Mhm.
Everything's normal. Everything's okay here.
Yeah.
I'm pleased that we're doing this topic today, Generation Kill, because
Ooh.
although it is a totally different theater of the war on terror, what's going on as of the time we're recording this in Afghanistan just made it feel like, I don't know, just made it feel more relevant. It really, in some way, has no relevance, but in another way, it just felt deeply relevant.
That's
and I
interesting.
actually, Iraq is so fucked up. That was the thing I realized actually when I was watching this Generation Kill. So for people that don't know, Generation Kill, 2008 HBO miniseries, 7 episodes between 62, I think, and 70 minutes long.
Yep.
So pretty much like almost watching the trilogy. And it's about a Marine unit that invades Iraq during the 2003 American coalition invasion of Iraq from Kuwait all the way to and around Baghdad. And what I noticed when I was watching it was I actually started taking my normal notes as I was going and all that. And then I just stopped taking notes and then just started making a few bullet points, because in reality, I don't know that what I want to talk about is most about the characters and events per se, as much as about the themes in the movie or in the show, and various things you would observe about war and warfare that I think are interesting. And I really was thinking about you a lot during this, obviously, because I just feel like this is a show that will resonate with you, because I feel like you and I both have this real weird fascination with the military in terms of like just the what I would call the minutia of it, like how it works. And I just feel like there's a lot of that in this. And I think it's more astute in that way than I think even Band of Brothers, which I feel is a more celebratory movie or miniseries.
Sure.
This feels much more dark and dire, almost gray. It almost feels pointless at the end, in my opinion. Like you have no idea what the point of that even really was. And I think
The
that
ending
is kind
scene?
of just everything about it, even the last episode, like how it ends. So anyway, and by the way, you guys can go out and watch. You should watch this if you haven't. It's an HBO show, so it's obviously with your HBO subscription. But I actually let my HBO subscription lapse months ago because I was like, I'm just not using it. And so I made this decision. It is a little silly, I guess, but I just paid $20 for the series on Amazon because I'm like, you know what?
Did you really?
Yeah, because I'm like, I don't need anything else. You know,
okay.
I'm also happy. I know it's a little weird. Some people think this is weird, but I'm happy to pay for some of this shit. Like, I'm just like, yeah. Is Generation Kill worth $20? Sure.
I think so. I think it is.
Anyway, you have your options a la carte or with an HBO subscription. But Dig, I got to know, what did you think of Generation Kill?
Oh, man. I mean, I really, really enjoyed this series when it first came out in 2008. And I had only seen it once. And I had very fond memories of it. It's funny that we talked about the very last scene in the show, because I've probably watched that last scene set to Johnny Cash's When the Man Comes Around dozens of times. I love it. I'm in love with that scene. I just love what it could mean, how it's kind of a character defining thing at the end, who exits first and everything. We'll get to that. But I was excited to do this one, Kyle, because, as you guys know, we talk about so many more popular nerd culture / pop culture things on the show. A lot of the things that we've seen, that we've all seen, and that we're revisiting to talk about. But I was psyched on this one because I have a feeling that this miniseries went under a lot of people's radars. A lot of you guys probably haven't seen it, which is kind of cool. So we could kind of turn you on to something that you haven't seen before. And also, it's an easy watch either way. Even if you have seen it and you haven't seen it in a long time, like you said, it's under probably 8 hours all told of content. A very quick, digestible miniseries, 7 episodes. Some of them are a little over an hour long. And I think it's really worth watching for a lot of reasons, but it's such a snapshot in time. It captures a period of time that I think could be really privy to an interesting conversation. I think it was a really confusing period of time. I think going back and looking at that period for the realism of the show and what they were trying to achieve and what I think they did pull off with the series. Now looking back not only at this piece of content, but at that period of time that this content is talking about in our rearview mirror, I think it makes for a really interesting conversation and creates a lot of emotions for me. And I think it's also really brilliant and entertaining, and it's a lot different than so much of the war content, films and TV shows and TV series that we've got over the years. It just feels a lot different than a lot of the World War II content or Vietnam content. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. And, we could talk about the brilliant acting. We could talk about Evan Wright, based on Evan Wright, who was a journalist, a Rolling Stone writer and journalist who had was embedded with this Marine Recon Battalion. And out of that, created a 2004 novel based on his experiences. And then the miniseries was based off of the book, of course. I started listening to the audiobook version, but I'm not all the way through it. But yeah, man, I was really, really excited. And also the other really interesting thing is you had your early experiences with this show years ago, even though you didn't get too far along, were negative. So I really wanted to see what you thought of it and getting all the way through it, and was really kind of secretly, not so secretly, hoping that you would enjoy it, because I thought, in what, knowing you and knowing the kind of content that you dig, I thought you would, by the time you got to the end of this, you would enjoy it. So I'm interested in hearing what you thought of it.
Yeah, it's, I think you're right. So I should preface by saying when Generation Kill came out in 2008, I rented it on Netflix that summer, I want to say, with just by CD like you used to do, or by DVD, by mail. And I remember watching it and not liking it. And I had actually questioned, I'm like, did I watch it all? And I think I actually did, because in the last episode, or the second to last episode, there's that shot where they shoot the smoke grenade and hits and kills the person on the road. And I'm like, sure. I remember that. Like, I definitely remember, because I remember being like, oh, I actually viscerally again reacted. It scratched something in my mind. So I'm like, maybe I did make it all the way through. But I remember not really liking it. I remember kind of not finding any of the characters likable. And I think I was especially put off, as I told you privately, I was put off by what I found to be the completely absurdist nature of the Marines, and almost the nihilism of it, right? Yeah. Like the total
feels like that.
And it wasn't that it wasn't realistic, because it is brutally realistic, and I didn't think it was unrealistic at the time. I'm just like, I don't want to watch this. Like, it seems almost dismissive of what happened. And I also think, because you're saying it's a snapshot in time, it's a snapshot in time of 2003, May 2003, from 2008 through a book published in 2004.
Yeah.
And if you line it all up, I've said this in the past, like, I was a pretty neoconservative person with my foreign policy for much of my childhood into my college years. And a lot of Republicans were. I was always a laissez-faire, live and let live type Republican, where I was like, I don't really care too much about what you're doing in your bedroom or anything like that, but let's go fuck these motherfuckers up. I mean, that's how I felt. And I think in 2008, I had dissuaded myself of that and became more of what I am today and have been for a long time, which is pretty devoutly anti-war and just anti-violence. And this, I think this show proved a lot of why that is to me. But I think at the time I was watching it, I was still coming to terms with my own support of this. And I think maybe subconsciously it was difficult for me to watch, because I knew that I was one of the 80% or whatever of the United States that supported going into Iraq.
Sure.
And also differentiating, as we were earlier in the show, between Afghanistan and Iraq, which I think Americans fundamentally understand this, but I don't think people around the world understand this about us. We differentiate and know the difference between these two conflicts, and they have different places in the American psyche. Afghanistan now, with what has happened with the Saigon-like pullout of Kabul, is going to paint it a totally different way. But no one really had a problem with Afghanistan. I never had a problem with it. I just thought, I was like, 10 years ago, I was like, all right, let's go. Like, I mean, it's time to go. You know?
Right.
But I think we had every right, even with my own foreign policy today, to say, like, we're going in Afghanistan and we're going to go after the people that did it. But we have to, it's like a mark and reprisal, where you go after the target and you leave.
Sure.
So I think if I'm making any sense, that I had to absorb Generation Kill through the lens of someone who started to regret their support of this conflict a couple of years prior. Remember that, and we don't have to get too deep into the history of this, but Iraq gets heinous, and they start. It's interesting because there's a lot of foreshadowing of that, if you want to call it that, in a lot of the dialogue towards the end of the show about like, well, now the shit's really gonna hit the fan. We've destabilized this place. There is no law and order. Remember, Iraq broke down because Saddam Hussein ruled the country. It was a dictatorship. It was
Sure.
The trains ran on time. That wasn't the problem. But when you depose that person, then the trains don't run on time anymore. You know, invoke a little Mussolini.
Of course.
So, does that make sense to you? That I feel like it's a piece of interesting cultural Americana for me, because
yeah,
Iraq began when I was in college,
yeah.
and those were my age people fighting. I actually asked Micah, who's 8 years or 9 years younger than me. I'm like, do you know anyone that fought in Iraq or Afghanistan? And she's like, no, I don't think so. And I'm like, that's nuts. I know
she's too young.
So many people that fought there that like you could just list the names off of people, just tons of people. And so maybe that's a little bit different for me too, and something that maybe even your generation missed out on in some way. Your generation might have been more like officers or like real enlisted men, career men. But this was interesting because it's a kind of a war fought by my generation, like the first millennials. You know,
you are Generation Kill, yeah. Right. Anywhere from being a late teen to I would say mid 20s during that period, and they would fall probably snugly from the 21 to 23 age group. A lot of these guys that we're talking about in the show. Sure. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're a Generation Kill. It's true. It's interesting. I mean, start the conversation there, right? I mean, post 9/11, we had the September 11 attacks, early spring of 2003 when we first marched in for the Iraqi invasion / war to depose Saddam. And it's such an interesting period. Like how much, looking back now, you have to understand the sentiment of being an American, or let's say being a United States citizen. Early 2003, we're still reeling from September 11th. It's only been, it's been less than a couple of years. We're living largely in fear. We're waiting for the next shoe to drop. Not just in the United States, but I would say the world / especially the Western world, waiting for the next terror attack. Things happened in dribs and drabs in other places and stuff, but we're waiting, really essentially living in fear, waiting for the next 9/11. And a lot of us, many of us, were still really angry and we wanted revenge. And I say we, of course, there was a more liberal anti-war contingent. Even on September 12th, 2001, of course, that existed, right? But largely, a lot of us really wanted some sort of satisfaction, let's say. I'm guilty of that as well. And I look back and lament that, feeling that way. But it was really a confusing time. And how much of this, marching into Iraq to take care of Saddam Hussein, how much of it was appeasement for the United States citizens to go after somebody to do something to strike back? How much of it was some notion that Saddam Hussein just had to go? And make no mistake about it, Saddam Hussein was a terrible human being. He was a ruthless dictator and murderer, But was it, and you could get into this conversation for hours, but was it the right time to go after Saddam Hussein? As you said, the Taliban backing terrorism, holing up in the mountains in Afghanistan, that was a more, of course, a very elusive adversary, not, hearkening back to previous wars in World War II and even in Vietnam, where there was a sort of articulated or definitive enemy. This was the war on terror was a much different ball of wax, and we were brand new to it. So just think back to the sentiments and those feelings going in. A lot of it helped me to relate to the characters. This is a very no holds barred sort of pull no punches account of war, the warriors involved, wartime during this very specific period and snapshot in in time for the United States and the coalition and the Western world and what was going on in the Middle East, and reeling from this massive terrorist attack. And it's true that it's not a whitewashed account of things. We're so used to content that we also love. Think of what we had with things like Saving Private Ryan, iconic movie, right? Of course, Band of Brothers. I found myself relating this to Band of Brothers a lot while I was watching. And the Vietnam movies we grew up with, I mean, where you almost get off easy, especially with World War II, because again, it was a much more definitive conflict between good and evil, right? Even though you might fall somewhere in between, or you could always make an argument, it was much more of a definitive thing where it was like, this is a battle of good versus evil. If evil wins, the world is doomed. That type of black and white scenario. Where Iraqi freedom and going into Iraq, it was just, especially in retrospect now, like there's so much gray going on in there. And, knowing Evan Wright with his book and then taking this over to the screen, his goal was not to demonize the Marines or the American contingent, but also he didn't want to paint them as saints. He really wanted to create something that was realistic. He wanted to paint a very realistic picture. And, we get that. These guys were under-armored. They were undersupplied. There was some seemingly inept leadership, maybe overly ambitious or political, vying for glory with some of the officers. Maybe they were jockeying for position and stature rather than making moves and maneuvering without the soldiers' safety and success at the top of their priority. You see some jockeying and some brash maneuvering and some poor judgment with some of these guys. But supposedly that's really how it was. I think it would have been much harder to watch real time because we wanted to be righteous. We were going after these guys. We were trying to exact revenge. We wanted some sort of response in defense of the loved ones that we lost and the heinous atrocities committed on September 11th. But I think by 2008, as you said, Kyle, we were already coming out of that. We already had some perspective. We already had some distance in the rearview mirror, and we can make better calls about it. And you know what? Also, something really important to say, which I think this series does talk about with some of the characters and scenarios, the heroism and heroes still springing out of this specific situation and culture, despite the quote unquote mess. So there's a lot to say there. There was heroes, there was heroism, there was selflessness, there was, brotherly love and all of those. So in the end, and you get that with some characters, and some of the characters you get that maybe they were a little bit, they weren't heroes. Some of the characters were a little more self-centered or afraid or maybe even cowards. So you get a little bit of everything. And I love the realist, $56 million budget, pretty high budget, short series. I think it's pretty incendiary series. And I really want to turn people onto it because I really do think it's undervalued. I do think it's an undervalued series. And even in watching it again, I really got to say, man, some of these characters I love as much as, the people that we fell in love with, the men and soldiers we fell in love with in things like Private Ryan or Band of Brothers. I think it's right up there. It's just shorter, more concise, if anything.
There's so much that you said there that I wanted to touch on. I think the coolest thing about the show perhaps is, or not the coolest thing, but maybe the most clever thing is just the basic act of being a war correspondent. And Lee Tergesen plays Evan Wright in this, and he's awesome. I mean, I loved him in Oz, but he's really great in this, and he's kind of the proxy for the audience in some way because everything he's witnessing is new to him, just as it's new to us. But I had remarked at the end of the show, I was like, you know what? He's just as brave as everyone there, if not a little more so, because he wasn't even able to fight back.
Hell yeah.
And he had his, I came to really respect that. I was like, wow, this guy's like really cool. And it seemed like they came to respect him too, which is why I was a little disappointed with his goodbye at the end when it seemed so lackadaisical. And it's like, the show challenged me to accept that these guys are Marines are a little nuts. I know Marines. I mean that with all due respect, and that like they're not gonna get all emotional and say goodbye to someone in the middle of the battle or whatever like that. But seeing all the bruised and rusted edges of their unit and their infighting with each other and all that towards the end was difficult to see, because it's like, man, you want this to be a little more wrapped up. It's almost like everything about this is fucked up, and they almost get out. See, the ending I think is so powerful because it's almost like they get out with no consequences, right? Like they don't even take a fatality at that point, which is nuts. And that's kind of the thing. If I knew that, because I was anticipating like, who's going to die? Like someone's got to die.
Yeah.
In fact, there's that one scene where they clear the bridge and the guy, like they get really crazy with it, where the guy's like, yeah, like, and they're like, he turns his back. And I'm like, oh my God, this was like a Spielberg movie. That guy would get sniped.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
And I was just waiting for it. I was waiting for it because I was like, come on, like, but they didn't do it. And so they get away with basically no consequence. But the consequence is deep because it's mental, it's physical, it's haunting, it's all of those things that's going to affect each of those characters differently. But what Generation Kill does a really good job of is showing the consequences of war that we never see in the United States because we never have fought here before. And I think it's easy to go overseas, not easy logistically, of course, but it's easy to go overseas, fight somewhere else, and then come back to your first world country. And you had brought up the anti-war movement after Afghanistan. The anti-war movement was really stifled at that point. It was during the bubbling of Iraq. Remember 2002, fall of 2002, remember Colin Powell going to the UN with the vial of anthrax and all the rest,
Sure,
and setting out the case for going in. And they were lying. I mean, we all know that now. But you go back to this really consequential moment and you realize that the anti-war movement really started to grow and grow. And I remember friends of mine going to those massive marches before the invasion where there was like millions of people in the streets, including my friend Brian, who was the bassist in my band at the time. And I respect the shit out of those people now. I feel like they really just understood. And I was wondering, and I've always wondered if it's just that every generation has to learn about how horrible war is in some way firsthand. And I don't know why that is. And I think this show also reminds me of that, right? Like a war against insurgents, a stateless insurgency where they're fighting over their land, their way of life. Like we did that in the 60s and 70s. We know how bad that is. And we know how little respect we had for the Iraqis compared to the Viet Cong, because they say it over and over again in the show, right? And maybe we shouldn't have. I would assume anyone would think the Viet Cong were a fiercer fighting force. They killed like 60,000 Americans, not, a couple thousand. And wow. Every American is different, but they slaughtered us compared to, now we really fucked them up. And we, in Vietnam, millions of people died. But you just see the casual nature of war and what it does. And I don't know how someone of age could look at Iraq now, like in the way it all went down, especially afterwards. Iraq became heinous. ISIS and the caliphate there, sure, and all there. I mean, it was way worse than we made it worse. And now it's getting better. But it's like, do we have to see it firsthand? When can someone just trust the previous generation's experience? And that's what annoys me about Iraq the most, is I was like, fuck, I got involved in this.
Yes.
I was during the Iraq War, I was majoring in American history. It could very well be that I was taking classes about Vietnam when this was going on. And I clearly remember articulating defenses of the invasion. And I clearly remember articulating further invasions in the Middle East too.
Wow. Okay.
That wasn't uncommon either.
No. This was.
We all thought it was going to culminate in Iran. I mean, we all thought that at a certain point.
Right.
But it's like, what the? I look back. I mean, I've been what I would consider vehemently anti-war for, since Ron Paul, probably. So 2007.
Sure. Yeah.
But I have to own that I wasn't. And I have to own that I own a little small microscopic fraction of what happened in Iraq, as we all do.
A lot of us.
That allowed it to happen.
Yeah.
And the other thing I got to say, Dig, and we can get into this too, is this is just another stark reminder, in addition to what's going on with Afghanistan now, about sheer incompetence at the Pentagon, and that the people on the ground make it happen. But the leadership involved in the U.S. military is this golden calf that is not allowed to be, this idol that's not allowed to be judged. And it's starting to rust from the outside. People are starting to look at it and be like, when's the last time you won anything? And it's a valid question to ask. Why wouldn't we ask that? That's their only job, is to win the conflict.
Right.
So you see the vast competence on the ground and the incompetence in the leadership. And I think that is another theme, another string to pull in this.
Absolutely. Absolutely, dude. It really makes your heart go out to the leadership on the ground, and makes you think again and again about the puppet masters pulling all the strings. And many times, with whatever kind of ineptitude or, selfishness or whatever the hell's happening there. I know there's so much to say about that. I mean, it really does make you think back to this period and really wanting, I think a lot of us were just governed by our emotions and wanting, and probably also justifying, I could speak for myself in this, probably also justifying, marching through the Middle East on some sort of campaign and just saying we're going to take out all the, the worst case scenario is we take out all these anti-Western rulers that would do harm to the United States had they the power or had they had the opportunity, so a lot of it was justifying it. And you're absolutely right. You really do give credit to the people who were able to overrule their own emotions or overrule their own need for revenge or vengeance and speak out against these wrongful campaigns earlier. They saw what we ended up seeing much earlier. So it's automatically tip of the cap, because I was probably pretty hawkish until 2005, maybe even 2006, where I started to realize like this isn't the way to do things. We have to honor what happened on September 11th, especially because it struck so close to home for us, but also for many millions of Americans. And sort of leave that, not, always honor that, always remember that, but, proceed from that point in a righteous way. It sounds corny, but that's the best way I know how to articulate it. But yeah, and you look back at this and you look at some of the soldiers and their hawkish behavior and the fact that they want, characters like Trombley, which we'll get into, where it's like some of it, if you understand the period and you were there, for our younger listeners, that were too young to remember, a lot of that sentiment in the soldiers who were following is, and also the distrustfulness of seemingly liberal media like West Coast based Rolling Stone magazine, and having this guy come in and thinking he's going to be super judgmental and he's going to kind of cast aspersions and be, come in with his gavel and start judging everything. So that sentiment was really a larger American sentiment at that time. It wasn't just the soldiers. A lot of people felt that way. And it also occurred to me, Kyle, right? You get the Marines, even a battalion, platoons like this, a small cross section of the military. You have to understand, these guys weren't just coming from the American United States Northeast and the Pacific Northwest, the liberal contingents. They were coming from all over the place, where the sentiments were very varied, especially at that time. Maybe they were from the Middle East. Maybe they were from the Midwest. Maybe they were from Texas. Maybe they were from the South. So who knows, what these guys were bringing in, especially at that time, and feeling what they were feeling. A lot of it, again, is hearkened back to and immediately sort of linked to September 11th for me. And a lot of those emotions and sentiments and what we wanted and what we were calling our military to do or supporting our government to do was largely based on that. And it took time for a lot of us to realize, like, all right, this is a wrong-headed approach, you know. But I think even though we don't get to see American civilians on the ground back home and all that kind of stuff in this series, we're in Kuwait, we're in Baghdad, we're in Iraq with the soldiers behind enemy lines and everything like that. But that was the sentiment even that we see from the contingent of people that were following. And, you know, even guys down to Evan Wright, you know, where he was like, you know, he came in and he had to earn their respect. And then also, let's just talk about him for a second. The courage was unbelievable. It occurred to me watching him, he's definitely the audience surrogate. You're right about that. I would have asked for a gun pretty early on, and he never does. And they get to like him, and they see his courage, and they see that he's kind of they accept him after a certain fashion, and they go out of his way to protect him like any of their other brothers. But yeah, he is. If that was a realistic portrayal of what he went through and how he handled it, I have to tip my cap to Evan Wright, because he really was courageous. And I love the way he earned their respect with saying he wrote for Hustler. Like, he got in there, and, you know, he cleverly sort of made his way in to blend in with the troops and everything. But, you know, the conversation really does start with him. And I love the way he wasn't a major character. Like, it wasn't following him around. He was there. He was amongst all the major players, but he wasn't front and center, which was really kind of a cool way to handle it, I think. It really paid more homage to the actual soldiers.
I think so, too. I also think he doesn't have many lines when you really think about it, which is, you know, he's often looking and asking questions and all of that, which is great. And yeah, I wondered that, too. There's a really cool scene where he hands off a grenade during one of the attacks. I don't know if you know, like, and I was like, that's kind of cool, you know. But yeah, he doesn't ask for a gun. I don't know that would really be allowed. I think that if it was like a last stand type thing, I think they would have given him a gun at that point.
Yes.
But
I'm kind of waiting for that moment.
Right.
Thank God it doesn't happen.
Right. I think that if they were like surrounded or like just needed every bullet flying, then they would have probably given him something. But yeah, he is a great character. And I was going to ask you that next about kind of who some of the characters that you wanted to call out were. I wanted to start with Godfather, if I might. I think that this character played by Chance Kelly is awesome. And obviously, you know, Lieutenant Colonel Stephen Ferrando, there's something really awesome about the way this character is portrayed and the central kind of ethos of his unit, which is just sheer aggression. And it's, as you said, this guy is a loose cannon. I mean, he is. And they want glory. And it's interesting because I try to differentiate between the people, and I couldn't, between the people that really wanted the glory and the people who understood that was what being a Marine was. In other words, do you really want to like run full long into this conflict, or do you want to do it in the best way possible? And I actually would really love the honest answers to those questions, because I think you all have to buck up and man up. I'd like to think, and I was thinking about myself a lot in this situation about like, how would I do and what would I do? I think at some point you just have to go along and get along. But I was wondering what you thought about the kind of the leadership of this man, the kind of position of him, and it's interesting watching it now because General Mattis, who's Major General at the time, is referenced and is actually in it. Robert Burke plays him, but General Mattis was Donald Trump's Secretary of Defense, and has become a pretty controversial figure since then, although he was one of the people that turned on Trump. So it's just interesting looking at it through that lens too, that his ambition brought him all the way to the top of the Pentagon. And Ferrando is, I don't know what he is. Talk to me a little bit about how you feel about this guy, and especially his insistence on talking in the third person, which I think is hysterical.
Yeah, such a great character. And you're right. You don't really know exactly where he's coming from, but I love, of course, the raspy voice, hence the Godfather nickname. And he says, right, at some point he had throat cancer, but he wasn't ever a smoker. So it's just one of those things. And such a memorable performance, obviously, with the voice and the raspy intonation. But one of those things where you see that he, as you say, the aggression, he's directly responsible for leading the troops on the ground. He's always got some sort of plan. He's highly motivated. You know, he's got, and you don't know if that over ambition is for glory and station and promotion, or if it's just his, you know, sense of duty in being a major and being a military man, a career military man, a warrior, having been, you know, I was wondering about his age. He's got to be at least in his 40s, you would think, at this point in time. Maybe he's in his late 30s, but it seems like he's much older. And you would expect somebody of this magnitude militarily to be pretty wise, like have that sort of wisdom, you know, that experience and everything. And he seems to be governed by just wanting to maybe act too fast and act too aggressively. And he loses a whole supply truck. He loses their company colors. Like he definitely messes up. You know, he's at the center of some of the biggest problems that happen. And he even says one of his biggest laments was losing that supply truck and everything because, you know, completely beholden to acting too aggressively in that specific campaign or that specific situation. And I was constantly trying to sort of estimate what he was all about. What was the motivating factor here with him? Was it, you know, battling for stature, or was this really his heartfelt, genuine desire to just a sense of duty, just to want to, you know, squash the enemy and not necessarily brutalize the enemy, but win? You know, was victory his whole thing? And he has that conversation very late in the series with Evan Wright, and he sits down and talks to him, and he basically says, like, it's kind of a character defining moment for him after guessing along after him for 7 episodes. He basically says, like, write, you know, be truthful, write what you want to write. Like, I'm not here to tell you of that. Thick says that to Wright earlier in the series, but then Godfather echoes it towards the end, where he's like, you know, you're gonna write what you're gonna write. Like, be honest and truthful about it. So he does. That's a little bit of a character defining moment. And at least he does own his mistakes. I found myself, you know, you find yourself in this situation, like any good piece of war content, a show, a movie, you get to like these guys and you're worried about them. You have that anxiety of what shoe is going to drop next, who's going to die, who's going to get hurt. Oh my God, you're worried for them. And I think it starts with Godfather because you're hoping that his leadership is going to get these guys through safely. And I spent the 7 episodes really wondering if it was going to be enough, or if he was making the right decisions, or if he was unnecessarily throwing these guys at times into, you know, danger and potential death. So that's where the character created a lot of tension for me, even though I enjoyed the performance. And, you know, that sort of brash, seemingly fearless military leader, you know, officer, and that he was, but that he was beholden to somebody in General Madison, that he had to answer to people too. It did seem to me, I think I come down in that he was, you know, sort of a self-promoting dude. That's what it seems
I think he definitely was. I mean, I think there's no doubt that he was putting his men into harm's way. I think the only question more puts you in harm's way, but putting them needlessly into harm's way. Think about when they're trying to cross that bridge and they get all gummed up and all of the rest. It's serious. And but on the other side of it, because one of the themes in this, I think, is the chain of command and listening to those above you and all of the things that the guys below do to scuttle what they consider to be poor orders, especially with Captain America, who we can talk about, is I feel like that works to the American military's advantage in some way. Like, these guys are all so anxious or a lot of them are anxious to fight and kill and engage, that they go, we fight in almost blitzkrieg like lightning warfare based solely on the ambition of the various officers and the various parts of the campaign, which is interesting. I mean, I feel like probably every war works like that. And I think that this war is no different. So in some way, Generation Kill encapsulates that in some way. And I really dig just I love the again, like the whole spirit around that character about how he like stands there, he like comes off the helicopter. I love when he's with Mattis, he comes off the helicopter 15 seconds later, he's, you know, we're on a new map or whatever, and he's talking to them in there and they're like their semicircle. And I was saying to Micah, I'm like, this is so funny because every time they talk to him, it's like the intro to a mission in Call of Duty or something where it's like, we know he's pointing and all the guys are standing around and he's got a sidearm on his, you know. And I also, by the way, just real quick throw out, total right turn, but I'm going to forget to say it. I couldn't help but think about G.I. Joe a bunch just in the guys' silhouettes and the gun, like their guns and their knives hanging on their legs and all the different specialties.
Cool.
Like, yeah, it's super cool. Like you could see like, oh, that guy is like low light and this guy is like, you know, dial tone and all that. And I had to throw that little nerdy thing in there.
Oh,
too.
Definitely. You think of G.I. Joe a million times during this.
So what other characters? I mean, there's so many. Who else would you want to dive deeper into?
I mean, I think the conversation for a lot of us would start with two characters, with Brad, Iceman, Colbert, and Lieutenant Nate Fick. I think those are two of the characters who are turn out to be the most admirable for me, but also the ones who were kind of attached to through the whole thing. There's a series of characters who, you know, it's actually interesting because this Recon Battalion is broken into sort of platoons and then companies. So there's a certain, for me, I have to really say, like, obviously I was never in the military. I come out of a place though of real genuine admiration for serving and especially for putting yourself in the line of fire and the courage that must take and not knowing if I really have that sort of medal or not. Always really admire it. And when I watch something like this, I try to really go out of my way as much as possible for an understanding of how it really works. But especially for you military people out there, if I get it wrong, I apologize. But I try to have an understanding. For me, it was a little bit confusing because this Recon Battalion is broken up into companies and platoons that seem to be on equal footing, you know, in this case, based on who's in each Humvee. But then actually the same guy in each platoon could outrank each other based on specific rank, right? Sergeant, lieutenant, so on and so forth. So it was interesting to me, for instance, that Fick was answerable to Captain America because they had similar duties, but Captain America outranked Fick. So I was sort of trying to spend my time understanding the chain of command and how that fell, especially with the lower officership. So that was interesting. But let's start with Iceman. Let's start with Brad.
Sure.
I think, you know, played by Alexander Skarsgård, who, let me start by saying, could easily be a new man crush for me.
Yeah, he's a good looking guy.
Dude is unbelievably charismatic and handsome, right? And then I didn't really realize, outside of being a Generation Kill fan in the past, like, pretty big filmography. Like, this kind of put him on, you know, from Sweden, did a couple of small things. I think he's of Swedish descent.
Yeah, he's Swedish.
Right? Come out to Hollywood. And then this sort of role propelled him into the limelight, which I could understand because it's a brilliant performance. Really interesting performance, really interesting character. And Iceman, obviously, because of his unusual calm, even in the thick of things, which, of course, for somebody like me, just being any of these characters for me is like, you're already up on a pedestal, courage-wise, because I don't know if I could do that. I honestly don't.
Me neither. Yeah.
But he is the epitome of that. And you could see the way he moves, the way he was just born for this. You know, he's obviously a career military guy. They say that. And you see the respect he commands from his comrades. And just a really unbelievable performance. And one of those characters who, like Fick, could sort of ascend to those heights of heroism despite all this shit, despite being undersupplied and despite not getting what they really need and despite having to buy shit for his Humvee out of his own pocket. Like that sort of thing, despite the ineptitude in the leadership. Like, you know this guy, by the end of this series, you know this guy is destined to become, you know, hopefully senior leadership. Like, he's just got everything it takes. And he gets them, he largely gets them through safely. He's the one who you had mentioned earlier, Kyle, sort of exacts the strategy of using smoke grenades to turn vehicles away rather than just shooting, trying to approach things the right way, even in the face of danger. And what strikes me too, before I forget to say this, we think about war, right? And I know very little about it realistically, but think about World War II, fighting on beaches, fighting in the woods, fighting in cities. You think about Vietnam, jungle warfare. Desert warfare is very interesting. Now they had to deal with desert warfare, which is mysteriously not played up too much in the series, which I would think would be the intense heat and sometimes maybe even the cold at night,
Right.
which they didn't seem to really play up that angle. And that just might be the Marines being tough and not complaining about it. But also not only the desert warfare, which is a whole different ball of wax, but also fighting in those big cities with sometimes, big buildings, 10, 20 stories high and all that kind of thing. How that must have been an interesting and relatively new thing for American/coalition troops, having that. Of course, we came out of things like Desert Storm in the early 90s, but it was a relatively new thing for camo, for weapons, for supplies, for tactics, and all that kind of thing. So that was interesting. And he seemed to be, we know that characters like Brad and I think Tony came out of Afghanistan, right? They came out of campaigns in Afghanistan. So they're already relatively, which was much more mountainous and everything, but they were already kind of relatively used to that terrain and everything and weather. But yeah, I really love this character. I can't really decide. I started with my favorite. I was kind of unfair, but I really don't know if I like Brad or if I like Nate better. But for me, those two characters are just, I think, I'm kind of a sucker for the hero and, this, functioning at such a high level when everything is going against them, when the chips are constantly down and they constantly have to fight this uphill battle, that they could be such amazing leaders is something that I really, I would aspire to myself in that situation.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, Alexander Skarsgård went on later. He was a character on True Blood, which was huge. Also on HBO. And then he was in Big Little Lies, also on HBO, and he won an Emmy for that. So
did he really?
Yeah, and he's also in The Stand, which is supposed to be pretty good, but I'm not getting CBS All Access. That's not happening.
Great actor, dude. I mean, really, really like a good actor.
Yeah, I enjoy him. I enjoy his character as well. And I like, he has that computer screen and stuff. It really goes to show you that, and I couldn't believe, I just don't understand this. This killing machine. You've trained this killing machine, and then you don't give them what they need. And you would think that would be like just the most basic priority, right? I know that it goes without saying, but you give them the finest training and shape their view to be murderers in this campaign.
Sure.
And they're doing what we're asking them to do. You would think you would be like, whatever you need, like if you have your M4s and all of that, but like make sure to have the finest Kevlar, the most armored Humvees, the best rations, like the
right.
Get you as whatever you need.
Extra helmets, actual batteries for your night vision, like
right, exactly.
Little things.
It's just so weird, and I know that they go a little bit into it with the gunnery sergeant, but it's like, what the fuck? And it's so weird, and it should annoy us because we spend so much money with the military. It's just another reason that the military is made by the people that are at the bottom, and everything else is just garbage. It's just inept, right? And you could see that with what's going on in Afghanistan right now. Oh, we couldn't see that contingency. Really, none of your war games and simulations showed that contingency.
Played that out, right?
Something's wrong. And I think that the stink goes pretty deep. Like when these things happen and no one is held to account. That's what I'm interested in what the Afghanistan thing is now. Not to be too political, but it's like someone's got to go. And if the Secretary of Defense or Joint Chief of Staff, someone doesn't get fired or leaves, like what the fuck? I mean,
it's crazy.
Is anyone going to pay a price? And you wonder when you just look back at this and it's like no batteries, right? For your night vision, the wrong camo type. you're giving them jungle camo. We haven't fought a jungle war since the 70s.
Oh, right. The toxic suits.
Right. We haven't fought in a jungle campaign since 1975, really 1973.
40 years.
And
dude, that's crazy.
I mean, so like those kinds of things, or not having the proper lubricant for your machine gun nests. And that's the thing that where I was like, man, imagine if these guys had what they needed. Imagine if they were in armored vehicles. Imagine if they had the finest weaponry and the ability to take care of it. The finest training, which they own, and also the best intel and all the rest.
Right.
And be the tip of the spear and work like a functioning unit. That was what was so frustrating to me. I'm like, man,
it's so frustrating to watch.
Components are there. I really believe, and I think that this is common knowledge now, the American military is just made to smash. That's it.
Right.
Like destroy.
Right.
And that's great. We're great at destroying, but we've not fought a war where that was necessary since 1945. We needed a finer touch every step of the way. And so it's all of those different things about why are you putting very competent people like Fisk, like Iceman, and all the rest in these positions? And it's amazing that they all lived. That's what I was saying. They all live in this unit, right?
Like, you know what though? You're right though, Kyle. But like, let's say your military does have this sort of Hulk-like steamroller mentality or philosophy where we're just going to go in and we're going to barrel over the enemy with overwhelming force, and our soldiers and our equipment and everything is better. But you can't do that and also keep the troops safe. Like, the officers have to go out and buy their own cami nets for their Humvees, like, and spend, what's $500 to a military man is a lot different than $500 to the United States government. They shouldn't have to buy their own mods for their Humvees and night vision and be short on food where they're only eating one meal a day. Like, this is 2003. This isn't a third world country. It's the United States of America. Is it? Now, I'm talking out of sheer ignorance here, but this is the only explanation I could possibly think of, as ridiculous as it sounds. Is it made? Are these conditions created to make them tough? It's the only thing I could think of.
I would imagine they do insinuate that at certain times.
They talk about that, yeah.
Like Marines make do or whatever. If you want everything, go to the Army. But I just still don't really get it. Like I get it, but I don't. Like when they're in their most fighting shape in Kuwait,
yeah, and
they're just fucking around, they have everything they need and they're good to go. Like at that point, you'd be like, okay, why wouldn't we just keep this as like the baseline? Yeah. Make sure that they have the maximum comfort. They call themselves, they call everyone else the Pogs, right? The people other than grunts. But there's an importance to that. And for some reason, I don't know. I don't know enough about Iraq. I haven't studied it. I was in college when it was going on, so it wasn't even something that we had an opportunity to study. But I would like to know more about that as far as preparedness, a lot of blue on blue kind of shit going on too. Like in this, and you see it a little bit in this show, but that was pretty common in Iraq. A lot of people died because of that. That meaning, for people that don't know, like good on good or, friendly fire.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's just, it's interesting to think about just how efficient we could be. But at the same time, like I know a good friend of mine who was in the Marines, who was a helicopter gunner in Afghanistan and Iraq. And he used to tell me like they would get like these invoices of like parts, and the prices would be like insane, like $100 for a bag of screws and like all this kind of shit. And you just wonder, you realize, and again, not to be too political, but it just has to be like, you realize that a lot of this is just sucking money into private companies' coffers. And it's exactly what Dwight Eisenhower said in 1961 when he was leaving about the military industrial complex, this idea that the economy is becoming dependent on war, and it's becoming dependent on perpetual war. And you can kind of see that here too. And I kind of wonder why we don't just kind of shake it out in such a way and be like, what is going on here? Why are things so expensive? Why aren't the war games quite right? Why aren't people prepared? Why are we rushing around and all of that? So I agree that I couldn't avoid all of those questions as I watch this. As interesting as the characters are, I had so many more questions about their situation. I actually want to read the book because I think that it'll get a little bit more into that problem.
It's good. It's just that it seems pretty the series is very faithful to the book, but the book just gives you more. Obviously it gives you more detail. I know you really get to like these guys, and you're just so frustrated that they're put in this position of just being undersupplied and in a way just kind of thrown to the wolves, it feels like sometimes, with like, you're throwing these guys into danger, into harm's way, as you said. Like, equip them properly. They have the training, they have the know-how, they have the courage, they have the willingness to do it, but they don't have what they need. They have to battle for what they need. It's it creates infighting and what platoon has what. And, that's the only thing I could see, is that they're put in that situation to, made to deal with it, which is, it just seems wrongheaded to me. It's gross. It's pretty gross, man. And just watching the show, even though obviously it's fiction, it's covering something real, and just knowing that these guys were put in that situation is just, this was less than 20 years ago. That's ugly.
You had also brought up the character, and I do think it's an important character, obviously, Nathaniel Fick. Another, I think, audience surrogate in some weird way.
Yeah.
He's played by Stark Sands. Micah was making me laugh because she was like, he looks like a store brand Jesse Eisenberg, which he kind of does, but
he does. That's a good call.
But I didn't realize, I was reading about him, like he is more into stage stuff, I guess.
Okay.
So he's been in some movies and some TV shows, but I liked his performance here a lot. Obviously, you sympathize with him. He's the one that's kind of most directly rubbing against inept leadership, or at least very aggressive leadership that's putting him and his people into harm's way. And he's the one that is kind of taking the brunt of being the squeaky wheel, even though there are others around him that are also equally squeaky, and then others that are taking advantage of the situation and being the exact opposite. So what do you make of his character?
Yeah, such a great character, man. And just reading about him in real life too, like this was an Ivy League kid. He was like in his junior year at Dartmouth when he decided to join the military and become a Marine. Like, he was on a completely different track. I think he said his father was a lawyer, his mom was like a social worker. He had a very Leave It to Beaver upbringing, and he decided he was gonna, he to vie for some sort of military officer position late in college and leave his Ivy League thing, and then just completely alter his whole track, which I thought was really interesting. And he is such a compelling character because, as much of a Boy Scout as he is, we know that he has the respect of Brad, which is maybe one of the only leaders that we know early on that Brad really respects and listens to. So automatically, like, who is this guy? And such a wonderful leader, and really concerned for the safety and well-being of his men, while also being just aggressive enough and dutiful enough to get the job done. But what makes him so interesting is that he isn't afraid to actually question and lash out against the leadership. Although he is this, sort of storied Marine, by the book military guy, he does speak out and speak up against the leadership when he thinks it's wrong, because he's genuinely concerned for his men. He's the ultimate officer in that position where the number one priority is the success and safety of his guys. And, he really kind of fights the good fight, not only against the Iraqis, enemy Iraqis, but also against, the military that he thinks is wrongheaded, in guys like Casey Kasem and Captain America, all the way up to Godfather. When he disagrees, he makes a point of it. And he's so good at what he does that it's intimated along the lines at some point. Godfather says, like, to another one of the officers that's complaining about Fick, he says, like, he basically says in not so many words, like, he's so good that it doesn't matter that he's defiant. Like, he's not going anywhere, obviously. Like, he has the respect of the men and he gets the job done.
Right. So
to be able to be that good and not even be really reprimanded by senior leadership really was telling. And I know now he's in the private sector and everything like that, and he's a COO of some company, might be some militarily linked private company, but really a compelling character. And for the actor, for Stark Sands, like, really remind you how young these guys were. Like, I think he went to graduate school after he finished his campaign or campaigns in Iraq or wherever else he went, which is like, wow, these guys, even the officers who were responsible for all these guys, the safety and tactics and success of these military operations, like they're kids, you know, which really, again, speaks to the frustration of not giving them what they need. You know, these are like young guys, you know, they're out there fighting the good fight, but you're not giving them what they need. Again, I can't get over that. It is a very frustrating part of watching it, but it's a great reminder and a very honest portrayal of, you know, you wouldn't expect that. You would expect some third world country to they don't have the funding, they're undersupplying their guys, are doing the best they can with what they have. But again, you know, seeing guys like Fick in this position of, you know, just kind of trying to commandeer what they need just in order to simply get the job done and carry out their orders. Very, really interesting. And, you know, yeah, for me, it's like that combo of Iceman and LT that were, you know, they carried me through the whole thing. I love, and I worried for them, not only for their safety, but for the guys who they were responsible for, who they cared for too.
Right. I want to talk to you about the show's humor a little bit and how that comes through in some of the characters. I feel like there is something absurd about war and absurdist and very funny in a lot of ways. And I love that it unabashedly comes through. And I appreciated it because I feel like it's one of those situations we say in our family, right? Like, if you don't laugh, you'll cry. It's like, yeah, absolutely. I get that. I laughed out loud, like hysterically laughed so many times watching this movie or this show. And I know it's supposed to be funny, but I think in the moment it probably was funny too. And knowing myself, like if I were a Marine, and how can you help but think of like you were a Marine, what would you do? I think I would have, by the way, what it took mentally to be a Marine. I don't think I have probably what it takes physically to be a Marine. Maybe I'd be like some pog or whatever, but and in fact, I don't know that you'd want me like on a gun when I'd probably be much more useful writing or doing something else, but maybe on the radio or something. But I really loved how what I find to be something funny about the terror, something funny about the bloodiness, the finality of it, whatever. How can you not have that attitude? I almost feel like maybe it's played up so much. Maybe these guys are so self-aware in their absurdity because they're bordering on they're about to enter chaos. It's about to be life or death. They're asked to just jump into these horrifying situations. I mean, imagine you being me being in a situation, just like one of the situations we saw on the show, just one of them. That would probably define your mind for the rest of your life. Now imagine doing that in a foreign country at the behest of someone else, just going from place to place to place to place over like a month and just being in those situations over and over again. How can you not help but laugh at the insanity? And I think that this is best seen in Dave McGraw, Captain America, played by Eric Nenninger. I kept texting Dagan quotes from him because I just think he's so funny. This guy is out of his mind. Now, a person like this is dangerous, and that isn't funny. But they call him Captain America because they know it's funny. And his constant terror in the situations, and like talk about the Tet Offensive, and we're getting cut out. I sent good men to die in there. It's like that. It's like so. It's my best men are dying in there right now. Like so funny. No one's dead. So, what did you think about this particular character?
He is such a great character, and I love the honest portrayal of not only the senior leadership, but these guys, sergeants and lieutenants who are platoon commanders who I think operate in a couple of ways. One, you could understand the soldiers under them frustration with dealing with these guys, because this was a guy who really wasn't, I mean, even if he was just a gunner, like a saw gunner, like Trombley, or a Humvee gunner or something like that, and he didn't really necessarily have anybody under him, a corporal of some sort, he would be scary because he's unstable. And I think it comes down to these guys, Marines, the training, their nature, just their inherent nature. A lot of it, I'm sure, is governing fear. You know, you're going to be fearful in this situation. as placid and even keeled as Brad seems, for instance, right? There's got to be fear under there. Fear for your life.
I love that they show it every time he brings out his huge gun, like, and puts it on the side of
to use the scope.
Yeah, like I just love that they keep showing that motion of him putting it on the side as they're rolling out. You know,
so good.
Yeah, it's cool. Like,
so good.
An acceptance of what's going to happen.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a great point. You know, so you could see some of those guys who are more successful or calmer in the situation. They have fear, but they're governing it. This guy, this Captain America guy, he operates from a sheer place of terror and panic, almost like a child. Like, he doesn't have that governing mechanism. He just operates on complete fear. What's scary about that is he's leading people, you know, and they can't even take him or his leadership seriously because he flies off the handle. He's kind of, I don't want to say he's a coward because it sounds judgmental, and I know I would be a coward in that situation, but he doesn't have the mettle to be a leader in combat, which is scary. And it makes you think of his origins, like what propelled him, or what made leadership think he could ascend to those heights of leading men in battle, right? It's sort of a crazy notion. It comes off in the series, it comes off as very entertaining. He's stealing, you know, it's said that he's stealing AK-47s from the enemy. Not only that, but he's using them in battle. And every time they hear an AK-47, it's him shooting, because he always shoots first because he's reacting first. They think they're being attacked because they hear an AK-47. So one of the guys tells him, like, no more of this, or I'm going to beat the crap out of you. And he continues to steal the AK-47s, but then later on he doesn't use them. He dumps them in the river and stuff like that. So a really interesting character. I was almost expecting to see, you don't expect, you know, due to the rules of fiction or whatever, or good writing, you don't expect to see him die, but you expect to see people die as a direct result of his poor leadership, which happens. I mean, he basically gets a guy's leg blown off in a minefield, right? Later on. But thank God that's the only, not to minimize that, but thank God that's the only thing that happens as a result of his faulty leadership. I mean,
right. Other than getting those guys in trouble when he was fucking with the prisoner and
that's another, dude, that's a crazy part. They have that guy in custody and he stabs the prisoner, even though they have him under control. He stabs him with the bayonet. Thank God the knife goes into, like, the prisoner's bandolier, like ammunition bandolier, or else he would have been, who knows what would have happened to that guy, you know? And also that's another character defining thing for Fick in trying to navigate the waters of dealing with Captain America and be diplomatic about it without, like, reporting him to Godfather or the general, you know, trying to protect him in a lot of ways. Fick does. So yeah, he's an interesting character, but he's God, the fact that they say, I think the one problem with a lot of these real life soldiers said that Evan Wright, even though a lot of his portrayals were very realistic and genuine, they said he was a little too hard on that sort of middle management leadership, that they weren't that bad. They were kind of played up for fiction. So you're hoping that was one of the characters that was played up for the sake of good storytelling.
Yeah, you never know. It is interesting that when he sits with the Godfather at the end, he's one of the only characters he specifically talks about, or one of the only guys he specifically asks about. So that does show that there might be a little bit of a chip there, but he saw what he saw. I guess I trust in him. Another character I wanted to bring up was the character of Mish, the translator in the battalion.
Oh yeah, great character.
Played by Nabil Elouhabi. I think I'm saying that right. Elouhabi.
That sounds close.
Way too many vowels in there. OUA all together. I don't know what to do with that. So I feel like this plays up another of the incompetent, underprepared sort of thing. This theme. I don't know how you send in an entire battalion with one person that can speak the local language. Now, I know that it's a much more obscure language for Western audiences than, say, finding the appropriate people to speak. It wasn't that hard to find German speakers, French speakers, etc., Dutch speakers for World War II. Vietnam was obviously much harder. That's why we took so many of them out of there when we left, because they were translating for us. It's the same thing in Afghanistan with the various local languages there. But here, they don't speak Arabic, and it's interesting that they don't seem to really care. You know, like it's never really urgent. You would think you would have one of those guys in like every other truck, maybe, in order to understand best what's going on. And I wonder how accurate his portrayal is too, because he's hysterical. Like, he's basically just robbing every person that he comes across of something. And he's got like the gold chains hanging off his Kevlar at the end, and he like steals the goat from the guy, and he has like the little kid just giving him beers and stuff like that. And I love how he said like he was told to translate kind of with like a positive spin. So he was like trying to translate everything with a positive spin. And they start asking him like what the people are saying, and he just starts answering before even talking to them. You know, there's a lot of like funny, like there's a lot of funny shit going on with him. What did you think about that particular character and what it represented about our lack of preparedness to be even in this country, about the sledgehammer nature of the Marines, which is great, but what do you do when you capture someone like and get information? And by the way, Godfather's moving so kinetically that they're bypassing a bunch of shit that they really should have stayed with. Weapon caches. They let like the Republican guards go a few times, and the Fedayeen or whatever get let go in the very beginning, as you remember, like the death squads and the pickup trucks. Like, they just keep letting these guys go. And at any given time, they just could have taken Misha and asked someone something, and they just rarely ever do. So what do you think about this character?
He is a funny character because he's manipulating his own position for gain, right? He's totally taking advantage of his station and his role with the military to get what he wants, and he's reveling in that. And it is interesting. It really kind of pronounces that whole thing of like when the Marines have to switch over from battling when they enter these villages and towns and cities, and they have to switch over to protocol and human relations and trying to get information and stuff like that, that Misha's really spread thin because they only have one. They're trying to deal with the injured. They're trying to deal with the civilians. They're trying to find out information on the enemy. They're trying to get all this info, and they can't because they only have one guy that's the go-to, that's operating as that sort of liaison. And again, it's the same thing as being under-armored or undersupplied or not having enough ammo or rations. Like, one translator, like, that's insane. Like, why would you embed one translator with these? They're the tip of the spear. You know what I mean? Like, they're getting if they need the information first, so they could roll out the red carpet for everybody behind them. So yeah, it's crazy, but yeah, it's a really funny character.
Yeah, I enjoyed his performance a lot, and I'm wondering what you thought of what I thought was really the only truly serious scene with him, which was when they find because this is a really memorable scene to me, when they find the passport on the college kid that they kill.
Oh, right.
He's from Syria, and he had just come over 2 weeks ago, and he literally wrote jihad as the purpose for his visit. This is a foreshadow, and I don't even think a real foreshadow. Certainly Edgar Wright couldn't have known, and even when the show came out, it didn't pop off with ISIS yet, but this is a foreshadow of what ends up happening.
Yes.
Iraq ends up being like the calling card where all of the jihadis are like, fuck, we have the American military engaged in a country in the Middle East. Everyone go to that country and fight. So we ended up fighting people from all over the goddamn place in this almost series of proxy wars that we were fighting against all of these different fronts. I found that scene haunting. I just wondered what you thought of that, because it really showed that there are true believers over there. We haven't talked, by the way, and we can talk more about, we really had no purpose there this time. Now, we did in 1991, right? Like, we had a purpose there, but we had no purpose there this time.
Right.
So that's important to note too. But what do you make of that scene and kind of this idea that the eruption of this conflict was almost exactly what a lot of people wanted, because they were like, we don't have to go to them now. We're never going to, they're not attacking. It's not 9/11 doesn't happen because they think the United States is going to crumble. 9/11 happens because they want to hurt you. And why would they, they don't want to go over there to hurt you. They can just hurt you here.
Right.
And make it so right. And it's exactly what the Viet Cong would say. And Ho Chi Minh and others, where it was like, just make it so hard for them to be here, because they don't, And by they, we don't look at death the same way. We can't withstand the losses. Like, we are very cognizant of total war and what it means for our men, right? Primarily 18 to 25-year-old men
Sure.
that are going to die.
Yeah. Sure.
So they take advantage of that. So what do you think about all that whole element? It did feel like a weird element of foreshadowing, which I thought felt so horrific.
Yeah, that's a great point. If you look at that time period, yeah, they saw it as an opportunity to fight, for the anti-Westerners or the anti-American contingent jihadists to come in and fight the Americans mano to mano, and that they saw this as an opportunity and as a calling card to, back up everything they quote unquote stand for. It's chilling. It really is chilling. I mean, people entering the country, jihadists entering the country just to fight or to kill Americans to get American scalps almost seemed, if you think about it from the context of 2003, it almost seemed so not only horrifying, but absurd almost, that it almost seemed like a conspiracy theory. But it's chilling that, and it's a chilling scene as a result of that this was really happening. People were really entering the country from other places in the world in order to take part in this battle that they saw it against the United States and the coalition. And it's horrifying. It's really chilling. And I love that they had that scene in there. And I'm sure that, as you said, that was the beginning. That was probably the tip of the iceberg of dealing with this at length through this contract. And I'm sure they saw it in Afghanistan as well. It's crazy that kind of stuff went down. You wonder how many people came in to do that. Also, that they were allowed in, that jihad was the reason they were allowed in for that. They got in. Who knows what, payola was switching hands or whatever. Mm-hmm. But also how many, but also from where, I'm sure I could think of some places, but I'm sure they came from places that you would never imagine.
I mean, remember that most of the 9/11 hijackers are Saudi.
Yeah.
So you which we're ostensibly friends with,
yeah,
because we don't want to lose OPEC. So it's obviously all geopolitical, but it's true. And it's interesting. There's just so much. It feels like the prologue and you're like, oh man, I know what happens next. And what's interesting is when this show came out, we didn't even know what happened really, truly next. Because remember, even Obama had like a surge and then pulled everyone out and all that. So
yes.
So, but I wanted to talk to you more about, to that point, the language barrier. Mm-hmm. How do you feel like that? What do you feel like that would be or how to deal with that, especially when you're dealing with an enemy like they are in this, that's blending in and clearly they know they're letting some people go. I mean, they show it over and over again. Guys are like basically waving at them, being like, we're getting away.
Yes.
And you're just in another world. I mean, you're in another world. And we were talking about a desert war. We fought a desert war, obviously, in Desert Storm, but in the same place. But it is different. You feel that doesn't feel like there's any cover. You feel exposed. It's just, and then you go into these cities and they have these really great shots of them in their Humvees looking up, and it's just these buildings like almost going over them, and it's scary. Suddenly you're in an urban setting, and then it's populated by people that speak a very foreign language. I mean, I can imagine, like, if you speak French, we might be able to find some common ground, or maybe you're a little more anglicized and stuff like that. But like, you're talking to some like Arabic speaking peasant in Iraq. I mean, you have no hope of communicating any meaningful information to each other. That's why on the road to Baghdad in the second or last episode, where the woman that speaks English is talking to them and being like, what the fuck are you doing here? Basically, It was like really cool because I think it shocked them, because it was like, oh, we haven't spoken to any of you, basically. So what do you think about that? What do you think about that total? I mean, I think that this, and I don't mean this as an insult. It's not. I just think this is the most foreign group of people we've ever fought, right? Like, because even the Viet Cong were first of all, supported by the Russians, but also heavily inspired by the American Revolution. So they have some sort of connection. In fact, Ho Chi Minh was educated in the United States. So this is different. This feels like almost fighting just a totally different group of people. I wonder if that stuck through for you too.
Yeah, I mean, that really makes up, for me, it ramps up the terror in that situation for them, of the enemy being able to hide in plain sight, especially in these villages, towns, and cities. And just being, as you said, Kyle, like almost as polar opposite as you could get on planet Earth in terms of geography, in terms of wealth, culture, religion, language. There's so many barriers between the typical, American, United States citizen and an Iraqi that you really are a stranger in a strange land. And I think what was important was going into those towns and they did this very heroically. They showed the diplomacy, the charity, trying to talk to kids, giving them stuff, letting them know that, we weren't there to conquer. We were there to help. But it's ironic in retrospect, especially because we really shouldn't have been there. There was, again, you talk about the war on terror being new, creating scapegoats, trying to appease the American public, the American populace, trying to find a way to strike back and get vengeance with, again, this elusive enemy, or creating enemies where they weren't really enemies, or saying Saddam Hussein. I mean, I think you could argue a lot of things, but Saddam Hussein wasn't a timely problem at this period of time. There were other things we could have done.
No, this seemed like a lot of people were like, this is unfinished business, because
Right.
I think very wisely when we invaded. So for people that don't know, in the late 80s and in the late 80s, Iraq invades Kuwait, takes it over. And we were like, you got to go. You can't be in Kuwait. And they don't leave. So we invade and push them out of Kuwait. And once we push them out of Kuwait, we just stop. Right. Like, and a lot of people were like, well, why didn't we could have deposed. In fact, there was some expectation that people were waiting for us to kind of give the signal to depose Saddam, and who knows what would have happened if that had happened, and liberalized Iraq, but it didn't happen. And then, so I think that people wanted that to change at that time. And that was a scapegoat. And I think it was, I mean, who can argue that that's just, it was used. It's like, oh yeah, Saddam Hussein, I remember him. He's a bad guy, but there's a lot of bad people. And
He's a terrorist.
It goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like, he did have nothing to do with 9/11, and like he had nothing to do with it.
No.
And it even goes into the difference in Afghanistan between, and we're talking about this again recently with the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. They're two different things, right? Like, the Taliban is the government of Afghanistan. The reason we had beef with the Taliban was because they allowed Al-Qaeda to train their terrorists in Afghanistan.
Right.
They knew that this was happening. They weren't in on 9/11 even. They were just giving safe haven to Al-Qaeda.
Yeah, so they were sponsoring it, essentially.
Right, exactly. Right. So we invaded to depose the Taliban, the same group that's now
Right.
taking Afghanistan back. Al-Qaeda is the terrorist organization that we were really fighting. When they left Afghanistan, which they did, in fact, I think they were saying even now that there were fewer than 200 people and that would even affiliate with Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan now. They've gone elsewhere. They're in the Horn of Africa. They're in Sudan.
That's crazy.
So they're gone. And that's why we bomb. I mean, we're bombing places all the time, and you just don't hear about it. We bombed Sudan. We obviously got involved in Libya. We got involved in Syria.
Sure. That's another one.
And I think that the only reason we didn't have boots on the ground in Libya and in Syria was because people were like, no way, man. Like,
not again.
But if Iraq didn't happen, that might have been different. And the other thing is that if we're going to use our army as a peacekeeping force and as a force to do right, we let a lot of shit go, and including like the Rwandan genocide. I think actually probably would have been something that maybe we should have gotten involved in that we didn't. Yet right. We get involved in all these small African campaigns with 100 or 200 people we insert. We don't even say anything. It's a little blurb in the news. You only hear about it if you listen to deep political podcasts that complain about this sort of thing.
Sure.
And then you see total overt action, like when the Russians take Crimea from the Ukraine, which was just an act of complete 19th century expansion. And we didn't do anything about that. So I think the easiest rule set to play is to say, like, we don't want to get involved in any of this stuff unless we are hit or a close ally is hit. Otherwise, we want nothing to do with it. And just know that if you hit, I mean, this would be my whole doctrine, is if to avoid things like Iraq, right? Is to say, like, if you hit us, we're going to hit you back 500 times harder. It's not even it's going to be totally unbalanced. You hit an American building, it's going to be a lot worse for you. So, and we'll just play tit for tat until you don't want to play that game anymore. But we're not going to commit We have fucking amazing weapons. We don't need to be there to do damage, right? We need to be there to nation build. We need to be there to do all those other things that aren't our job. But we can hit anyone we want from anywhere in the world. And I'll just remind you that when Osama bin Laden was captured in 2011, we have no presence in Pakistan. That didn't stop us from sending two helicopters full of, Delta Force operatives in there to take them. So we can do whatever we want.
Right. We
have the most capable military in world history. It's just not capable of nation building. And that's different. And I was saying this on Twitter recently. I think that's that's a quirk of the design of the United States. We're not an empire. We're not supposed to be an empire of liberty where it's just like, yeah, we're just going to liberate everyone. And little things happen and we're just going to take the country and it's like, we're not Rome.
Right.
This isn't how it works.
That's what it smacks of.
We're a republic and our army is supposed to be a sledgehammer. And the reason that it is a sledgehammer is because when necessary, we use it, like in World War II. To fuck things up, which we did. There was no fine-tooth comb that was necessary to fight the Germans and the Japanese. We did it with a sledgehammer. You understand what I'm saying? So
absolutely.
So I think this calls through the whole military doctrine of the United States, first with containment, communist containment, the domino theory, all the stuff and it only went okay in Korea. But even then, that was an armistice that was signed and half the country is still lost. Vietnam was totally lost and everything else is all fucked up. I just think it goes to show, and this particular show I think brings it through, as fascinating as American or just military culture is, as amazing as the fighting man is, as fun as it is to learn all about what they do, it would be best if we just didn't use them at all anymore. Bring everyone home and let's train them to the best of our ability. Let's have the finest weapons and technology, which we do, right? And if X, Y, or Z wants to mess around again, if they want to go back to Afghanistan, we'll be back. We'll be back, and it'll hurt for you, a lot. And that should be our doctrine. And I think that will generate a lot of peace. And then maybe we wouldn't get great things like Generation Kill, but at least we wouldn't have to lose thousands of young American men to a conflict that meant nothing. And I know that it's hard to say that, but it meant nothing. It meant nothing.
It is crazy to think about.
All it did was, and let me ask you this too. I'm rambling, but I do want to ask you about this. Right. Can you blame the people for fighting back? If I were an Iraqi and a foreign invasion, so I'm an American, a foreign country comes and invades us, I'm going to fight back. Right. I'm just telling you right now. I mean, I don't know. Now, I don't know that you would want to invade America because everyone has guns. Right. So I don't know that that's going to go great for you. But I would grab my gun and go fight. I'm not going to just sit around. So that's the other side of it. And it was Ron Paul that really showed me that. It's like, you can't, I know you want to think these are bad people. I know you want to think they're all bad. They're all like what they call the racist term they call them in this Haji, right? Like they're all just
right.
But they're not.
No,
they're human, and you're fucking their shit up. And if you did that here, no one would blame you for fighting the military that was invading your country.
Right.
So what do you think about that?
It is a really interesting perspective. Yeah. If you sort of take a journey and think about it from an typical Iraqi citizen, national point of view. Yeah. I mean, you got that's the problem with just everything in life, right? We examine things for our very selfish sort of, I don't know, comfort or our own perspective, sheltered. But if you think about from their perspective, even though we're saying we're coming to liberate you, we're coming to save you and depose this ruthless dictator that doesn't have your best interests at heart, that we're coming in, we're coming ostensibly saying we're coming in peace, but with tanks and Cobras and machine guns and everything. Yeah, you could, it's different. You could understand it from their perspective, but when you have a small country and a big country's coming in, it's it's just different from an American perspective. I think we're sort of, we have the perspective where we're lucky enough to be born American, but they're born where they are with their values and raised by the people they're raised with. Everything, that's the weird thing. Like, everything comes down to that slot machine. You're born American, you're born French, you're born African, in an African country, born in South America, you're born in this religion, you're born with this skin color. It all comes down to that, right? That infinite slot machine of
it's just the luck of the draw. It's just the luck of the draw.
Luck of the draw.
And that's why I think it's so interesting to think about nature versus nurture, which is why I think you have to just think about, you take an Iraqi infant, you bring him to the United States, he'll have nothing imprinted on him about being Iraqi. Nothing about him is going to be Iraqi except for where he came from, his skin color,
born.
Right?
Right.
And I've said this before, and it's hard to articulate, but people have to understand. It's like, do I think American culture is superior to most cultures? Yes. Yes. Do I think Americans are superior to other people? No.
Right. I see what you mean.
You know what I mean? Like,
I see what you're saying.
I think our culture is vastly superior. That's why people are fucking crawling all over themselves to get in here. No one's trying to get to China. No one's trying to go to India.
Yeah.
Those are great ancient civilizations, but we're amongst the best, sure. But I was just born here. And
is
so
that culture though, or is that opportunity? You know what I mean?
Or
is
I think
that
it's
one and the same?
Maybe one and the same. I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong about saying, like, we come from a superior culture, right? In the West, let's just say Western culture. Everything we do is Western, Yeah. There's nothing wrong with saying that. Right. What's wrong to me is saying, as an American, I am superior to the Somali.
Right. I see.
The American culture is clearly superior to Somalian culture. I mean, clearly, right? But the American and the Somali are just two humans in very different situations. If I were born in Somalia, I would be fucked and the Somali would be fine. That's it. That's the only thing that differentiates us. That's cultural, but that's not personal.
Right.
And I think that's why I think it's so important, for instance, to get, to get Afghans out of Afghanistan right now and bring them to safer countries, including the United States, if we can accommodate them. Because
the refugee thing is happening now, right?
Right. It is. And it's the right thing to do because they collaborated with us. They're going to die. I mean, that's why there's so many Vietnamese people in the United States, because they were also going to die, and we got them out.
Right.
And many of them did die. And many of the Afghanis are going to die, which is horrifying. And I'm not going to get into all of that. But what's so important about getting these Afghanis out, about getting the Iraqi out, or whatever that helped us or collaborated with us, is they're American. In fact, I read a really interesting piece about, like, this translator and his family, and he was saying, like, we'll be good Americans. Like, it was like this plea to, like, please let us in. Like, and I'm like, yes, because it's a culture, it's a spirit. You can adopt it. You can come into it. It can become something that is yours.
Sure.
Treating people differently because of where they are is the mistake. Treating the civilizations like they're equal is also a mistake. And we shouldn't necessarily want to instill, in my opinion, our way of life on others. If they're happy with that way of life, even though we feel like it's superior because we have the internet and we have our fucking refrigerators are online and whatever the case might be, that's great. I think that is what makes our shit superior, frankly. But if they're happy like that, they should be allowed to live in peace and be left alone, not judged for it or anything like that either. There's so many lessons to be learned, I think, in war, which is why I think we should just not engage in it unless absolutely positively necessary. And when I think push comes to shove, I think those wars make themselves known. And I think that the reason a war like that hasn't made itself known is because a war like that hasn't happened like in so long. A world war, like a global conflict, or a real territorial conflict, or a geographic conflict that requires us to be involved in it, that requires us to put aside peace, that requires us to put aside acceptance to kill.
Yeah, a prompt on behalf of ourselves, or, like you said, an ally.
Right. And to me, I just think it's like, you hit us, we fight. You hit Great Britain, you hit basically the Five Eyes, right? Like the English speaking world.
Right.
And it's nothing against
And
anyone
Japan.
else. It's just like those
Japan,
are,
I would say.
yeah,
too.
I would say, well, yeah, Japan and South Korea, but like basically the Five Eye countries, like the
right.
Australia and New Zealand and everything, like we have some sort of connection with our language, at least, and culture.
Of course.
We are all British. So like British culture,
point.
all of us, we are. So maybe we limit it like that. Maybe we limit it like NATO, but let's like let everyone else live. Let's let everyone figure out their own way. And like just treat people as equals, because the one thing I agree with you on as far as like civilization versus opportunity is that our civilization has given us the opportunity. Their civilization can't give them the opportunity. That's not their fault.
Right.
On the individual level.
Right. It's not their fault, of course.
And when I saw all the bodies littering, right, like, and I want to talk to you about the end of the show.
Yeah.
When you see the footage of all the bodies and stuff, and it's like, man, like that's a life dispatched for no reason.
Yeah.
I mean, some of them obviously are jihadis and fedayeen and all that, and they needed to be killed, but most of these people weren't. I mean, we killed, I think, I don't think we killed millions of people, I think, died in Iraq. All told, from 2003 until present.
A lot of collateral damage.
So I think people understand what I'm saying. It's like we can feel a superiority about being the West, in quotes, but we don't need to portray that on others. I actually think that the most steady way of imperialism is cultural, and people watching our TV shows and listening to music and respecting us. Maybe maybe, God forbid, we have a generation, like maybe we can go 20, 30, 40 years in the United States without fucking something up, fighting someone that we shouldn't be fighting, or bringing all the heat of the world down upon us, as that often happens. But anyway, I'm rambling on. I wanted to ask you about the end. What did you make of the ending and the film they put together? And what it means about them walking away from all of it and all the rest.
Yeah, they're watching the edited footage of their experience over that 5 weeks or whatever it is, 4 to 5 weeks in early spring 2003, from, getting from Kuwait to Baghdad, and their experiences. And it's sort of a compilation, and they're all sitting down in the rec room and they're watching this edit. And of course, played to Johnny Cash's "When the Man Comes Around," which is like an iconic song and so fitting for the situation. What I love about it is it's sort of a recap. There's a lot of like main characters, and then there's the periphery characters as well. I love that it's sort of a recap of the characters and their interrelations with one another. And it always seemed to me, and why I love this scene, and why I said earlier that I watched it like, a couple dozen times probably on YouTube, even though I've only seen the series all the way through a couple of times, is that watch it, because I think, and spoiler alert, if you guys haven't seen the series, don't listen to the end yet. But them getting up and leaving during the film speaks to almost, to me, an ascending order of, I don't want to say humanity necessarily, but it seemed like the true heroes are the ones that maybe leave first, and the ones that maybe are a little more, I don't want to say wrong-headed, guys like Trombley and stuff like that. But again, it's an interesting conversation, because if you put it again in the perspective of 2003 and how we were feeling as Americans, and the anger and the fear and sort of the flop sweat of wanting revenge and wanting satisfaction and all that kind of thing, like, I think that's sort of put onto the Marines in the show as well. And it's interesting, the ones that linger longer to watch the people dying, and to watch the conquering, and to watch the bloodshed and the gore, and, some of the atrocities that go down and all that kind of stuff, and the humor, getting humor and using, again, that humor and aggressiveness and aggression, as you said earlier, Kyle, is sort of a coping mechanism, I think, too. I think a lot of that's going on, too. And don't forget, too, right near the end, when they have that football game, you see a lot of that PTSD coming out already. The guys are done with war. They're ready to kind of ship out or shift over to the next campaign. The action is going to be done for at least a little while. And already that PTSD is kind of rearing its ugly head above. They're fighting with each other. They get in a couple of different guys getting a couple of different fist fights. So again, the sentiment, I think, not only of the military but of the American populace in general, kind of transposing onto the Marines, the PTSD, everything's sort of coming to a head. But I love that last scene because that's the last definition of some of the characters, and I think they sort of lead, the ones who were, I don't want to say in it for the right reasons. I don't know exactly how to articulate it, but the ones that were more down for or didn't mind, I guess in retrospect, the wrongheadedness of what we were doing there sort of linger the longest. And Trombley's the last one to leave, right? Right during that Johnny Cash monologue of and death was with him or whatever. And he picks up his giant saw machine gun and he walks out super aggressive. And the character of Trombley has no character arc. He's kind of a killer.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah. You know what I mean? He's an unapologetic killer. He's, an out and out Marine in that sense. He's in the right place for the way he is. You know what I mean? He says it in the beginning, I get more nervous watching a game show at home than standing here under enemy fire in the open. That's who he is. You know what I mean? It's an unapologetic look at each individual. And I think it's also important not to define the Marines or any group of the military, right? Any wing of the military by, collectively. It's reality. It's individual. It's like anything. There's the Colberts and there's the Trombleys. There's the Ficks and there's the Casey Kasems. So I think the end sort of sums that all up, and I always loved it. I always loved the ending. I think it's wonderful. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I love it too. I think it's symbolic, maybe a little bit on the head, or on the nose rather, but it's but I enjoy it too, and I love how much of a left turn it takes in showing some of the humor. I guess it's what I was saying earlier about the humor in war, along with just the bloody nature of it, like bodies alongside jokes, innocence alongside calamity. It's interesting, and I like that it was a reflection on the kind of enlisted man, as opposed to, I don't know if that's the proper terminology for the Marines, but as opposed to more of the officers who are actually in some of their own ways bigger characters. And I want to talk about one more of them in particular we haven't touched on yet, but yeah, I enjoyed the ending. I think that it was appropriate. I feel like very similar to Band of Brothers, that last episode, in this case the 7th episode, I feel like was a little, it kind of falls off, because I think what ends up happening is that we won, or their whole engagement is over or coming to an end, and so it crescendos, and then it's well, it's not Star Wars or something where there's this great celebration and you get a medal and all of that. It's well, now you're just going to get shipped off to some other theater or go home. And
great point. And they do a good job of illustrating that. It's it's not a definitive ending. What one thing this show does really successfully, Kyle, again, with that humanity and that realism, and maybe even a little disturbing, especially as Americans watching this and knowing these were our troops. We were over there. Maybe we weren't, they were just following orders. Obviously, this is their job, but maybe we weren't in the right place at the right time. And maybe this whole thing was wrongheaded. Is that you go from these guys making really inappropriate jokes about a little girl who sent them a card and some candy and stuff like that, right? To later on going out of their way and putting themselves in harm's way to hand out chocolate and peanut butter and rations to little girls the same age that are in, Iraqi villagers. So you see, again, that's just a very kind of cool way to illustrate that reality of the things changing, maybe sentiments changing, maybe characters changing, or maybe being all of that at once. And also, these are kids. You know what I mean? These are really young guys, a lot of them, that are under heat, that are doing this, that are putting themselves in harm's way, that are under, absolute duress, sleep deprived, exhausted. And then also, again, feeling the sentiments that many Americans were feeling at that time. So having all of that kind of tied together in the series really paints a sometimes disturbing, but I think really memorable picture of what it must have been like for those guys back then. I love that they're kind of authentic about it. You know, it's not a heroic thing like Band of Brothers, but it's also a different time. It was a different conflict. There's a lot of gray. There's a lot more gray in previous things, even in something like Vietnam. Like there's, especially when you're looking at something as gray as Vietnam, when this is making Vietnam look black and white. You know what I mean? It's like, all right, you know, this was an interesting time period, and I think an important conversation for us to have, not only as Americans but as human beings. You know, that this happened and it didn't happen that long ago, and you know, thinking also like just playing off of what, before we get to these last characters, just playing off of what you said earlier too. Like my hope, I think, in thinking back to being privy to all this, or being an American citizen while this was going on, and at a certain point in time, sort of backing the notion of like, yeah, we need to get rid of all the baddies in the Middle East because they're all terrorists, and we're kind of lumping them into one category, and just kind of being, you know, not being thoughtful about it, and just kind of sort of a knee-jerk reaction, I guess, a collective knee-jerk reaction, is that I hope that we were trying to do the right thing. I hope that the U.S. government, the U.S. military was trying to do the right thing. I suspect that going after a less elusive enemy like Saddam Hussein was an easy way out, when the war that we really had to fight was a lot more complicated and required a lot more thoughtfulness and maybe more time to suss out and everything like that. But my hope is that largely our hearts are in the right place, but I'm dubious. You know what I mean? I am dubious about that, as insofar as the American government and the military, and also not to scapegoat just them, the U.S., you know, us as U.S. civilians, as the general populace, you know, how much was, you know, it does seem like a mistake, but it also makes your heart go out to these Marines even more so. Because again, these guys are just doing their job like any of us do our job, you know? So that's something to sort of stew on, I think, a little bit, you know, think about, reflect on.
Definitely. A couple of the other characters I needed to bring up, we would be totally loath not to bring up Major John Sixta, who's played by Neil Jones. Now, there's a really awesome YouTube compilation of him just screaming and yelling at everyone about policing that mustache.
Potato Head.
Yeah, police that mustache.
Police that mustache. He called. Is that they don't? I don't know if they ever say. Is he Cajun? Like,
yeah,
I think
so.
He's from Louisiana.
Yeah, something like that.
He's got to be.
Yeah,
right?
and
he calls America Americi.
Yeah, Americi. I watch all my shows with subtitles, which I think I've said, and so they actually write that stuff out, like when he's saying things all wrong. But what I realized, and I love that the payoff with him is awesome. He's busting their balls the entire time just to make them hate him, so that they are mad at someone. You know, like, so that they are unified in their hatred of this random person,
like a drill sergeant,
right? Like
I didn't think of that.
It happens pretty quick, but there's a time when, like, later in the show, when he says something about the mustache to Fisk and then winks at him, and then later on, he says, like, you know, if the boy tell me if the morale's getting low, I'll get onto them about the grooming standards again. So it's not like he's just being a dickhead. I love that payoff. Like, his whole job is to just get the boys riled up and, like, yeah, they can just all hate me, you know, good, and have like this unified thing. So I love that. So what did you think about that character? I just absolutely, he had me fucking dying. Like, just, especially the mustache thing, just because in the beginning they show one of the characters with a Hitler mustache, which I think is so funny. And I remembered this from the first time I watched it, because I saw that and I just didn't say anything about it, because I remember seeing it and being like, why does he have a Hitler mustache? And I was like, there is a reason for this, but that is because it is literally within the confines of how they're allowed to shave their mustaches. So they shave Hitler mustaches, which is fucking hysterical. What do you?
I know. I even have one. Like, the mustache can't extend past the corner of their mouth.
So he has just a straight up Hitler mustache, which is just. What do you make of Sixta?
I love Mr. Potato Head. I love that he's comic relief. I love that they're always looking out for him. I love that his whole thing, like you said, his whole function is like, you know, standards and grooming and, you know, being up to the, you know, the whole aesthetic of being a military man. I love how he gets on the character about losing his helmet, about losing his Kevlar helmet, and all that kind of stuff. And it is a great point that I didn't even really think of. Again, not being a military man myself, like, yeah, this guy is just made to create ire. You know, he has to drum up the adrenaline in the guys, keep them on edge, you know, keep them frosty and all that. So fun though. Such a great character. I couldn't get, like, when he said Americi, I was just like, what is happening? It's so great. It's also a great illustration of how they're from all over the place.
Right.
You know,
I was thinking
you have
the same
this
thing.
guy from LA, you have a guy from the South, from Louisiana, like they're from all over. It's so cool.
And speaking of California, Rudy Reyes, who actually plays himself, which is pretty cool. I actually dig this character so much. I love the idea of the staid California bro, you know, he lights candles and has essential oils and shit like that. But then he's like a ruthless killer too. He's one of them and they love him. And I really dig this character. What do you think about him? And specifically that he played himself.
Yeah, it's so good. I would have never known. Yeah, Rudy Reyes, Fruity Rudy. Such a great character. Acting chops just as good as anybody else. I don't know. I think he went on to do kind of grew off this and used it to propel himself as like a personal trainer and stuff. But yeah, really great character. I love the fact that he's like really into like his appearance, and he's like, as you said, this Californian bro, and he's saying him and his spouse are moving to San Francisco, and they're kind of intimating that he's gay, even though he's clearly not, you know, but they're all like saying how handsome he is and all that kind of stuff. They have a crush on him and stuff. So fun. And also, like, I think Rudy kind of operated in an advisor capacity too. Like, I think the actors only had like a 5-day boot camp on this, which is interesting in the fact that you would think of like these guys would go through a little more, especially not only for the budget, but because of the realism.
Yeah.
But I think he was really integral in like bringing them up to speed as far as like protocol and being a real Marine, so it was cool that, and I know they were trying to cast him, and I think he was so good and so charismatic. They were like, do you just want to play this? And he did a great job.
Yeah, he did. He did do a good job. I also wanted to just give a shout out really quick to James Chafin, the corporal, who is played by Eric Layden. And people will know Eric Layden because he plays Cole McGrath in the Infamous games on PlayStation. And
nice.
So I just thought that was an interesting connection because there's so many people in this where I'm like, where do I know you from? And I actually, with Eric Layden, I looked it up. I'm like, oh, it's Eric Layden. And of course, he plays the brother in Mad Men as well. January Jones' brother.
Right.
So there's some interesting stuff there too.
That's cool.
Are there any other characters that you wanted to specifically shout out before we begin to wrap up?
You know, I love the character of Tony. He's the guy from LA that's he says he's like a repo man back in his civilian life, and he's always kind of lashing out about the black man and sort of half jokingly about like you don't even know what race he is because he takes exception to Native American.
Yeah, he's like the last time the white man gave me something, it was like he was like it was like blankets covered in typhoid fever.
Typhoid is so good, and I love the fact that he's sort of like the third in command as far as like main characters and doing the right thing, like right behind Fick and Iceman. And he's the third guy to walk out, actually, in the ending, too. He leaves. It's kind of Fick and his right-hand man, Gunny, who's Win, actually, who's an interesting character. Like, you don't see Fick in a scene without his right-hand man. His Gunny is always with him. And it almost seemed like he was like, it was so cool to me because he was always in the scene when you saw Fick, and he almost seemed to be operating in a bodyguard capacity. Like, no one was going to fuck with Fick unless you got through him first. So him and Fick leave, and then Brad, and then Tony. I like that character a lot. I think he was really a lot of fun. And who else did we forget to talk about? Oh, you know what? We have to talk about Ray a little bit because he's Brad's right-hand man. He in the Humvee. They have a great friendship. And Ray is a big source of comic relief in the show, like I think Tremblay is, and they're in the same Humvee. But Ray's thing is his sort of admiration for Brad, where he just wants to be Brad's bestie. Like he even gets jealous when Brad talks up any of the other soldiers. like Brad at some point says, like, you should be more like Trombley, and he gets really mad about that and stuff like that. His whole thing seems just to be Brad's boy, So Ray was a really fun character. And then, of course, Trombley, such a divisive character for me because I expected that character to take an arc. Like, he comes in here. Is he this ruthless killer that he's purporting to be, or is he just kind of reacting in fear and that's the way he's coping with everything? But it turns out, like, he stands up in the middle of a firefight and he says, like, it just doesn't make him nervous and that he wants to take bodies. He shoots the camel in the desert. And it turns out, like, he's just a little bit off his rocker. Like that, there is no arc. You know what I mean? He doesn't change by the end of the show. Well, in fact, they doubled down on who that character is.
I agree with you. I was going to say, like, in talking to people over the years of people I know in the military that were engaged over there, like, it's pretty common to hear that, like, there are people that go because they can kill. I mean, that's they go
incentive.
Because that's what that's what they want to do. Now, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with that if that's what you want to do. I mean, we need a soldier. We clearly need that. I mean, that's why I think it's so silly to pretend like you're above it. Like, we're going to send out our soldiers and then be like, well, don't be a killer. We might as well take the killers in our society and put them into that position. But it is true that he seems to take, and he gets their respect too, because he stands up during that. And, like, they don't use tracers or whatever. He's just basically identifying where the mortar is.
You're absolutely right, dude.
Yeah.
You know what? It's so much to ask of these people, especially young people. You're asking them to be saints and sinners. You know what I mean? Like, you want both things in the same breath. So how can you blame a Trombley? You know what I mean? That's kind of what you're recruiting. I think we have to kind of restrain our judgment a little bit about that. That's why, if you could be a Fick or you could be an Iceman in that scenario, that's why it's so admirable to me, because you are a saint and a sinner. You know what I mean? You know what you're there to do. You're dutiful and you do your job, but you're also trying to do that as a last resort. And you're also trying to make the protection and safety of your men and the success of your men your priority. That's a really hard thing to do, man. And, it smacks of, like you said earlier, Kyle, the physical prowess to get that done, but also the intelligence. And that's what makes those characters, a character like LT or Iceman so interesting, is that they have the physical tools to do it and they have the training, but they're also super smart.
Right.
Super smart. I mean, even Indeed. As far as, like, being articulate, both those guys in real life, when they're interviewed and stuff, like, they could very easily be podcasters. I mean, they're very well spoken, very intelligent. You could tell there's a lot of foundation underneath that. They're not just killing machines. But the fact that you could turn that on and off in wartime, I think in World War II and something like that is one thing, but especially in wartime like this, where it's a little more, again, there's a little more of that gray area. There's a little bit more of, like, that. I suspect they even had to know back then, like, what are we doing here? Like, and just doing their jobs. So again, like, I wore my olive drabs to celebrate you guys today. It's the closest thing I have. I wish I had camo. That would have been cool. I would have had the green camo instead of the desert camo.
We put on snow camo or something.
But camo. Yeah, man, I again, I really hope that this conversation prompts you guys to either revisit this or, even more so, discover it for the first time. Because, again, it's an easy watch, and I think it's underappreciated, and I think it flew under a lot of people's radar, back in this time period in 2008 when it first came out. So if you have HBO Go or Max, just jump on. Or, as Colin said, you bought it on Amazon?
I bought it on Amazon. Yep, it was $20.
Just grab it and watch. I can't see not liking it. So when we come out of this conversation now, Kyle, knowing your initial history with it and not really digging it, how do you feel about it? Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I thought it was great. It's definitely not the greatest of war miniseries. Like, I think John Adams, if you want to consider that, is certainly superior. Band of Brothers is certainly superior. I think it's better than The Pacific. And that's another show we can get into. The Pacific, I remember being really disappointed by.
Good point.
When it came out. I actually didn't even make it through. And it would be interested to see, because I was like, what is this? Like, I don't even understand.
Yeah, we'll do that one eventually. Band of Brothers set the barometer really high, I feel like.
But it almost feels like Band of Brothers, in comparison to this, isn't maybe the most realistic thing either when it comes to the interpersonal relationships and all of that. Because that's one thing I did want to ask you in closing. What did you think of just the virulent, open racism, homophobia and all of that? I was laughing at a lot of it, no doubt. Like the flagrant use of the word retard and
Right.
the word faggot and all of that. Like words that people don't use anymore, used more then, but were even, especially the F word, on its way out in 2003 with like common nomenclature. I feel like it adds to the absurdity. You can almost imagine that being like the expectation. And I feel like especially the dehumanization of the enemy is in some way necessary, although unfortunate. And these names pop up. Like I was saying, I think the slur they use is Haji, which is a term I've never actually even heard outside of this. But it reminds me of like Charlie or Nip or something like that, where you have like this racist kind of catch-all term. What did you think about that in closing? Like do you feel like it's, I think I can answer this because I can probably talk to my friends, but although I guess everyone that I know is out, I wonder if it's still like that, where it's like,
I wonder about that too.
You know,
I don't know how much of it just speaks to my own inherent nature, but I go in thinking that maybe they're being ironic or they're doing it to have a sense of humor, again, dealing with the stress of the situation and using humor as a coping mechanism. I think that speaks to me because I can't imagine anyone really feeling like that. But you do have to, from a realistic perspective, again, these are guys from all over the United States, all 50 states, different pockets of politics and feelings, and maybe not as progressive as the Pacific Northwest and the US East Coast and all that kind of stuff. So you have to not accept it, obviously, but you have to know that these are people coming from all walks of life and all different backgrounds. We're used to being in places in our lives, Kyle, where that doesn't really exist anymore, or there's such a small contingent of it that, it's almost relegated to absurdity now. But, if you're looking at these guys and taking a cross section of where they're from and who they're from and what they grew up with and the sentiment largely of the place that they were born and their religions and all that kind of stuff, these are people from all over the place. You don't see Fick and Brad talking like that, but you see a lot of the other guys talking like that. So, again, for me, my first thing is, they're being ironic or they're using humor. But let's face it, a lot of these guys were probably actually like that. Like we see Tony being ironic about being black. Obviously, he loves white people. He loves Brad. You know what I mean? But sometimes somebody might say something, or they're making fun of Fruity Rudy. They really love him. But they may make a homophobic slur. They were making fun of the gay Iraqi when they got into that one village. And they were legit making fun of that dude, right? You're the dude that was flirting with them. Right. So you just have to, again, the realism of the situation and the people that you're dealing with. It's like anything in life. You're going to have run-ins with all types, and I think that's the same thing that exists inside this Marine battalion.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. Very interesting stuff. A great show. Highly recommended. And I did want, I shut it down, but I did realize that the one character that played Coker.
Which one was that?
It was Owen something or another.
Okay, I'm looking.
Let me look here. Generation. I shut this off.
So many characters. That's the thing.
Yeah, I wanted to give a shout out to this guy just because. Yeah, here it is. It's Owen. Yeah, Owen Yeoman.
Okay.
Plays Sergeant Eric Coker, or Kocher as we would know it, but they call him.
Oh,
Coker.
I like that character.
I like that character too, but I wanted to give him a shout out because I was like, where do I know you from?
Yeah, where do you know
And it's because
he
plays Benedict Arnold in the AMC series Turn, which is
does he really?
wonderful war series. Yeah, he does. So that I was like, where do I know you from? It was another one of those things. I just kept seeing these faces, and that's who he is. He plays Benedict Arnold very well.
He's the character with the Hitler mustache, I think. Right?
There
were two. There were two.
Mustache. I think it was the doctor that had one too, which was
Doc was
Ryan,
another great character.
Yeah, he was great too. He was kind of the conscience of the group, you would say, which often I think the medic is. But so a few people. But I wanted to give a shout out to him just because I'm a huge fan of Turn, which is a series dating. You would love Turn.
I started it, but I didn't get far.
It's the American Revolution and Long Island. It's like
that's
the perfect.
Right.
It's
you know what? He is in that. He's in other things I could think of now too. Yeah, he's the one who sort of calls Captain America into question. He's the one who gives Captain America the ultimatum. He's like, you better stop with the AK-47. I'm gonna beat the shit out of you.
Yeah, that is him. And so I just thought that was funny, like to just give him a quick a quick shout out because I'm a huge fan of that show. And that's another show we should do. Just save that until we get to it. It's the same thing I'm doing with Lost. Like we'll eventually get to Lost, and then I'll be like, all right, well, I'll watch it again.
Yeah,
I'm not going to do it now. You know, we have to get through. We have to get through Battlestar first.
Yes,
get that off the plate and all of the rest. All right, Dig.
I gotta get on season 3.
Yeah, we'll get into that in a few weeks. Dig, let's close as we always do with a dad joke.
All right, my friend, let's do it. Dad joke today. Kyle, what did one hat say to the other?
I don't know.
Stay here. I'm going on ahead.
That's a good one. I like
so stupid, but it's
horrible.
That's the very definition of a good dad joke.
I agree. Dagan, very well done. Good to see you for another episode of KnockBack. Thank you all out there for your love, kindness, and support of our retro and nostalgia podcast. Remember, listen on free feeds. Also watch on YouTube. We appreciate that. But support us on Patreon if you can. Patreon.com/laststandmedia. Early ad-free access to every episode of this show. The ability to submit questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, and ideas. Although I did a thread, but I wasn't crazy about the inquiries we were getting. So I didn't use any of them. No, just wasn't crazy about it.
What is wrong with you people?
I didn't give them much time either, but I don't really feel like you need much time. I put up a thread for Sacred Symbols. I put up a thread for Sacred Symbols, and I leave it up for about 20 hours, and we get 200 responses. So let's get it going here, people.
Can we at least get 20 responses?
Yeah, let's get some responses, guys. But support us over there if you can. We really appreciate it. Obviously, those perks extend to our other shows as well, Sacred Symbols and Defining Duke. And you can get merch at laststandmedia.shop. We're doing a live show soon in Western Pennsylvania, but we'll probably be doing more of those in 2022. So keep an eye out for that. And that's it. Until next time, we'll see you then. Goodbye.
We are Oscar Mike.
KnockBack, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. KnockBack's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including KnockBack, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.